He looked her in the eye and scoffed. "You're sweet, Lila, but sweet doesn't turn heads. You're flat. Forgettable." His words echoed long after he left. That night, staring into the mirror, she whispered, "I'll change. I have to." Days later, using a fake name, she entered Dr. Ethan Hale's clinic, bracing for judgment. Instead, he asked gently, "Are you here to heal or prove you're enough?" She said nothing. Now, she blinked awake on a stranger's couch, wrapped in a blanket that wasn't hers. Lemon and soup in the air. Her doctor, the one who saw her pain without asking, slept nearby. Then came a knock. And there stood the man who once shattered her. What happens next will change everything. The rain tapped gently against the window panes of the cafe in Capitol Hill, a steady rhythm that usually soothed Lila Moore's anxious thoughts. But not today. Today, everything around her felt loud. The hiss of steamed milk, the scrape of mugs on saucers, the low hum of jazz. And yet, none of it compared to the thunder roaring in her chest. Ryan Bennett, her boyfriend of nearly 2 years, sat across from her in a dark green wool coat and that smug, slightly performative smirk he wore when he knew he was about to be cruel. He stirred his espresso slowly, as if the moment needed dramatization. "You're sweet, Lila," he began, voice calm, but with that sharp edge she'd learned to dread. "But sweet doesn't turn heads." She blinked. "I mean, you're obedient. You're safe. But you're boring." He chuckled like he was sharing a private joke with the universe. Then, tapping the wooden tabletop with his knuckles, added, "Flatter than this table." Lila's breath caught. She thought he was joking at first. Her lips parted, ready to form words, any words. But nothing came. Her throat tightened as heat spread up her neck. She wanted to disappear into her mug of tea, still untouched, still too hot. "You're serious," she whispered. "I'm done pretending," Ryan said as he stood, brushing invisible lint off his sleeve. "I need someone who makes me feel alive. Someone who walks into a room and owns it. You're not that girl, Lila. You never were." He dropped a couple of bills on the table, enough to cover his drink, but not the emotional wreckage he left behind. Then he turned, pushed open the cafe door, and walked straight into the arms of a woman in tight jeans and crimson lipstick. She kissed him like they'd been practicing. The bell above the cafe door chimed softly as it closed behind them. Lila didn't move. Around her, life continued. Cutlery clinked. Someone ordered a lavender latte. A barista laughed too loudly. She was invisible. She'd just been dumped, publicly reduced to cardboard, and the world didn't even blink. That night, Lila stood in the tiny bathroom of her studio apartment, staring into the cracked mirror above the sink. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, throwing unkind shadows on her face. She looked like a ghost of herself, pale, stunned, hollow-eyed. Her reflection stared back with quiet judgment. Her collarbones jutted sharply beneath the faded camisole she hadn't changed out of. She touched her chest with trembling fingers. "Flatter than this table," she repeated under her breath, as if trying to scrub his voice from her memory. A tear slid down her cheek, slow and searing. Her phone buzzed on the counter beside her. An Instagram notification. Against her better judgment, she opened it. There he was, Ryan, at a rooftop bar, holding that same red lipsticked woman close. Her chest pressed against him, radiant and full. The caption read, "Finally with someone who gets me." Lila turned away from the mirror and slid to the cold tiled floor, wrapping her arms around her knees. Her body shook with quiet sobs, half grief, half fury. When the tears finally ran dry, she crawled to the sink, pulled her phone back into her hands and typed into Google with steely fingers, "Discreet breast augmentation, Seattle." The first result was a private clinic in Queen Anne. 5 stars, dozens of glowing reviews. "Confidential," one said. "Life-changing," said another. She didn't overthink it. She clicked, booked a consultation. When the form asked for her name, she hesitated, then typed Mia Carter. Her thumb hovered for a second, then tapped Confirm Appointment. Lila looked back at her reflection, red-rimmed eyes, limp hair, trembling jaw, and whispered to the mirror, "If I change, maybe I'll finally be enough." The mirror, like the world earlier that day, offered no response. Only her own broken image, waiting to be rewritten. The glass doors of the Hale Aesthetic and Wellness Institute whispered open with a soft hiss, letting in a gust of Seattle drizzle and one very nervous woman. Lila, no, Mia Carter today, stood frozen in the warm, tastefully lit lobby. This wasn't what she'd imagined. No sterile white walls or cold chrome. Instead, the space was draped in soft earth tones. Lavender diffusers puffed subtly from the corners, and lo-fi piano music filled the air like a warm scarf. She stepped inside, tugging at the sleeve of her sweater. The receptionist greeted her with a practiced, pleasant smile and handed her a clipboard. "Welcome, Ms. Carter. Dr. Hale will see you shortly." She nodded, not trusting her voice. Moments later, a nurse guided her down a quiet, carpeted hallway to an elegant consultation room with soft lighting and cream-colored chairs that looked more like something you'd find in a therapist's office than a surgical clinic. Then the door opened, and in walked Dr. Ethan Hale. Tall, clean-shaven, and in his mid-30s, Ethan wore no tie, just a pale gray sweater beneath his white coat. His demeanor radiated steadiness, not charisma. It was the way he stood in the room that was disarming, fully present, unrushed, as though she weren't just another appointment on his calendar. "Mia Carter?" he asked gently, extending his hand. She nodded and took it. His grip was warm, grounding. He settled into the chair opposite her, opened her file, and then closed it again. "What brings you here today?" he asked, voice neutral but not cold. She hesitated. The words were there, but they felt like pebbles lodged behind her teeth. Ethan didn't press. He simply watched her, patient, calm. Then after a beat, he leaned back and said, "Can I guess?" She blinked. "You're not here because you hate your body," he said. "You're here because someone convinced you it wasn't enough." Lila's head snapped up, startled. His words had landed like a soft hand pressing directly over a bruise. "Am I wrong?" he added more gently now. Her throat tightened, but she shook her head slowly. Ethan gave the faintest of nods. "I meet a lot of women who come in thinking surgery can erase something someone else did to them. But if that someone couldn't love you as you were, no incision can fix that." Lila sat in stunned silence, cheeks flushed with something that wasn't quite shame, but wasn't far from it. Then he said, "Look, I'm not here to tell you not to go through with it. I'll help you, if you're doing this for you. But I won't participate in punishing your body because of someone else's blindness." He stood up and handed her a small card. "Go home. Think about what I said. Call me only when you're ready to choose for yourself." She came back the next week, still under the name Mia Carter, still unsure. They spoke again, this time less about procedures, more about what had led her here. Her voice shook, but she didn't cry. Not yet. As she reached for a pen to sign the final consent form, her bag tilted on the floor and something tumbled out. Ethan bent down to retrieve it before she could. It was a small, weathered sketchbook. A loose page fluttered free, face up. It showed a girl curled in a corner, knees tucked, arms wrapped around herself. Behind her were wings, faint and crooked, not yet open. Their eyes met as he handed it back. He said nothing, but he looked at her, not like a surgeon, not like a stranger, like someone who had seen. And though Lila said nothing either, something softened in her. The morning of the operation was quiet. The city was still waking as the sun slanted through the clinic windows. Lila lay under soft blankets, dressed in a hospital gown, her pulse whispering through the monitor. Ethan came in just before prep, his presence more reassuring than clinical. "I know this still isn't easy," he said, eyes on her. "It's not about him anymore," she whispered. A small, proud smile lifted the corner of his mouth. "Good. Then let's do this." The surgery went smoothly. No complications, no surprises, just precision, calm, and care. When she woke in recovery, groggy and sore, the nurse offered her water in a quiet nod. "You did great," she said. But the real healing had begun days before, when a stranger in a white coat didn't see a woman to be altered, but one aching to be seen. That night, lying in bed with the sketchbook on her lap, Lila added a single line to the girl with the wings. This time the wings were unfolding, and the girl wasn't crouched anymore. She was standing. The beeping of machines was faint, like a distant heartbeat. The sterile room smelled of antiseptic and lavender, a mix of clinical and oddly calming. Lila stirred beneath crisp white sheets, her body heavy and sore, her chest bandaged and wrapped tight. She blinked against the soft morning light seeping through the blinds. No voices, no flowers, no familiar laughter, just silence. For a brief moment, she forgot where she was, until the dull ache in her chest reminded her. The surgery, the clinic, Dr. Ethan Hale. She turned her head slowly, expecting to see nothing but cold equipment and white walls. But instead, something stopped her breath. On the small bedside table, propped gently against a vase of eucalyptus stems, sat a watercolor painting. Her sketch. But not as she had drawn it. Now the girl wasn't curled in a corner. Her shoulders were lifting, her knees unbent, and her wings, once tentative pencil lines, were now unfurled in vibrant swirls of cobalt, violet, and gold. She was rising. Beneath the image, handwritten in soft ink, "You have wings, even if you cannot see them yet." Lila stared at the painting, the edges of her eyes stinging, not from pain, but from something far deeper. Someone had seen her, not just her brokenness, but her becoming, and in that quiet, a seed of healing took root. The recovery was slow, but it wasn't just her body that began to heal. It was the quiet moments between. Lila found herself reaching for her sketchbook again, fingertips smudged with graphite, finding comfort in the lines. At first, the drawings were simple: hands, birds, a girl's eyes. But soon emotion returned to her strokes. She started going on short walks around the city, no earbuds, no distractions, just her and the world. For the first time in years, she wanted to hear her own thoughts. One day she walked into a yoga studio. The instructor, warm and welcoming, smiled as Lila shyly took a place in the back row. Her first downward dog was shaky, her breath uneven, but she stayed, and she came back the next day, and the next. She wasn't trying to become anyone new. She was learning to come back to herself. Then one rainy afternoon, Ethan reached out. "I'm working on something, a photography series called Becoming. It's portraits of people learning to see themselves differently. I'd like you to be part of it." At first, Lila almost said no. She pictured cameras and lights, and all the old shame rising like tidewater. But something stronger whispered beneath the fear. "This time, you're not hiding. You're becoming." So she agreed. The day of the shoot, Ethan's studio was filled with soft light and quiet music. No stage, no pressure, just warmth. Lila stepped in, her hands trembling slightly. Ethan didn't direct her. He didn't pose her. He just said, "Breathe, be yourself." The first photo caught her mid-blink. The second, her lips parting with a breath. By the third, her shoulders relaxed. Something uncurled in her chest. Not because the lens made her feel beautiful, but because someone was witnessing her without judgment, without expectation. For the first time, Lila didn't shrink. She stood, not for someone else, but for herself. And in that stillness, a new story began. The cursor blinked on the screen like a heartbeat. Lila stared at the empty text box of her newly created blog. From scars to courage. It had taken her weeks to land on that name. She had jotted down phrases in the margins of her sketchbook, tested words aloud in the quiet of her apartment, whispered titles into the steam of her tea. But this one felt right. Not perfect. Just true. She began slowly, her fingers hesitant on the keys. She didn't start with the breakup, or the surgery, or Ethan. She started with the silence, the kind that creeps in when you're told you're too plain or too much. When your voice gets smaller, your reflection becomes harder to meet, and you begin to wonder if your softness is a flaw, not a strength. She wrote about the day she Googled breast augmentation through tears. She wrote about the mirror she once begged for answers. She wrote about shame, the quiet kind that doesn't scream but settles like fog. And she wrote about healing, not from the outside in, but from the inside out. Then in trembling breath, she typed the final line. I am not a before and after photo. I am a person, and I am learning to love her. She hit publish. At first, she expected nothing, but within hours, her inbox flooded. You put words to what I've felt for years. I cried reading this. I thought I was alone. Thank you for helping me see myself differently. Thousands read her story, and for the first time, Lila felt seen, not for the way she looked, but for the truth she dared to tell. It had been 6 months since the cafe, 6 months since those words, flat, boring, forgettable, had carved themselves into her ribs. Now she was different, not because of a scalpel, but because she had finally come home to herself. And then on a rainy Tuesday came the knock. She opened the door to find Ryan Bennett, wet from the storm, a sheepish grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. Lila, he said, hands tucked into his coat pockets. I've been thinking. I saw your blog, the photos. You've changed. You look amazing, confident, sexy. He stepped forward slightly, eyes scanning her face for softness. I think we rushed things. Maybe we could try again. Lila didn't flinch. She didn't shrink. She didn't reach for the edges of her sweater or question her worth. Instead, she stepped into the doorway, the lamplight from inside catching in her hair like gold. You're right, she said softly. I did change. Ryan's grin returned. But not for you, she added, eyes steady. And I will never again be the woman who waits for you to come back. His face twisted slightly, confused, irritated, but unable to argue. For the first time, she wasn't asking to be chosen. She was choosing herself. She closed the door slowly, calmly. The lock clicked with finality. Inside, the room was quiet, but not lonely. Her sketchbook lay on the table, open to a new drawing. The girl had wings, full, fierce, and she was flying forward. The gallery was small, tucked between a second-hand bookstore and a flower shop in a quiet corner of downtown Seattle. The windows were fogged from the drizzle outside, glowing faintly from warm interior lighting. It didn't look like much from the outside, just another unassuming place in a city full of hidden things. But when Lila stepped in, everything stopped. The space was silent in that reverent, hushed way that invited breath to slow. The walls were bare except for one single painting at the far end, lit softly by a single spotlight. She didn't need to get closer to recognize it. It was her sketch, the one that had slipped from her notebook nearly a year ago. The hunched girl in the corner, only now, the figure stood tall, her wings fully formed and blooming with vibrant colors. Deep violets, sunset golds, ocean blues. Behind her, light broke through, casting warmth into all the places that had once been shadow. Beneath the painting, in small engraved lettering, "You are my most beautiful recovery." Lila's breath caught, a voice behind her, quiet, steady. I was never meant to keep it. I just couldn't forget it. She turned slowly. Ethan stood there in a soft button-down shirt. No white coat, no clipboard. Just a man with eyes full of reverence and something deeper. Not admiration, not even affection, but love. Real, quiet, earned. I've seen people survive, he said. Watch scars fade, strength return. But nothing's ever changed me like you have. He stepped closer. I don't want to be your doctor, Ethan said. Not even your healer. I want to walk beside you, not behind, not in front, just with you. From his pocket, he drew a small velvet pouch. No velvet boxes, no sparkle meant to dazzle, just something real. Inside, a simple silver ring. Smooth, understated. Engraved inside, breathe, shine, choose. Lila's hand flew to her mouth. He didn't kneel because tradition told him to. He knelt because his heart did. Will you choose me, Lila Moore? He asked, voice soft, almost shaking. As I've already chosen you. Tears welled in her eyes, not out of fear or pressure or fantasy, but from knowing. She didn't need someone to fix her. She had already done that herself. She knelt too, not to meet him, but to meet herself at this new chapter. And she whispered, smiling through her tears, I choose myself, and I choose you. He slid the ring onto her finger, and they rested their foreheads together in the hush of that gallery. No applause, no flashes, just two people sitting quietly in the afterglow of transformation. Later, they sat side by side on the floor beneath the painting, backs to the wall, fingers intertwined. "You turned my pain into art," she said softly. He looked at her, eyes warm. "You turned it into light." Outside, the Seattle sky darkened into twilight, but inside, the canvas still glowed, like a lantern for anyone who had once been broken, but never stopped trying to fly. The apartment was quiet except for the gentle ticking of the wall clock and the rhythmic tapping of keys. Lila sat curled on the couch, legs tucked under her, her laptop balanced across her knees. Steam rose from a mug of tea beside her, forgotten, cooling, as her fingers moved with purpose. Her blog, From Scars to Courage, had become more than a space for healing. It had become a lighthouse. Every week, she wrote. Some posts were polished, filled with reflection, hard-earned lessons, and quiet strength. Others were messy, raw, written through tears at 2 a.m. when memories clawed their way out. But every entry was honest. Every word bore her fingerprints, her tremble, her triumph, and the responses never stopped. "You made me stop hating my reflection. I finally told my story. Thank you for showing me how. You helped me feel seen in a world that always made me feel small." Sometimes Lila would sit in stunned silence reading the messages, grateful, overwhelmed, humbled. Not because they praised her, but because they reminded her that she was no longer alone. And neither were they. Ethan never left public comments. He didn't need to. After each post, like clockwork, a quiet text would arrive on her phone. "You are the embodiment of healing." That was all. 6 words. But they never failed to still her breath. The bookstore was small, intimate, just the way she'd asked. Warm lights hung above shelves lined with well-loved novels, and a modest crowd had gathered for the launch of her first book, Becoming, Notes on Shame, Healing, and the Quiet Fight to Love Yourself. Lila stood at the front, her fingers brushing the edge of the podium. Her palms were damp, not from fear, but from the weight of what this moment meant. Ethan sat in the front row, hands clasped, eyes on her. Not with pride, but with presence. That grounding stillness that had once held her in the quietest hour of recover. She took a breath, then spoke. "For a long time, I thought I needed a mirror to tell me who I was. I stood in front of one and saw everything I lacked. Too small, too soft, too invisible. Until someone, not a man who wanted to change me, but someone who simply saw me, reminded me that I never needed fixing. I needed reflection, not in glass, but in love." She paused, eyes sweeping across the room. "So to anyone still trying to become, anyone whose wings still feel hidden, let me say what I wish someone had told me sooner. You don't need a mirror to know your worth. You need someone to reflect it back with love." Silence followed, not empty, but reverent. Then came the applause, not thunderous, just honest. Afterward, people lined up, books in hand, eyes shining, voices trembling. Some asked for signatures, others simply whispered, "Thank you." And as the night wound down, Lila stood at the back of the bookstore beside Ethan, watching as strangers hugged one another like old friends. "You did it," he said softly. She looked up at him, smiling. "No," she replied. "We're doing it." Outside, rain dusted the sidewalk. A girl walked by in a hoodie, alone, her shoulders hunched. Lila stepped toward the glass door and pressed her hand to it. "I hope she finds her wings too," she whispered. Ethan took her hand gently. "She will," he said, "because someone like you already showed her it's possible." In a world obsessed with filters, before and after photos, and external validation, Lila's story reminds us that healing doesn't come from changing how we look. It comes from changing how we see ourselves. How many of us have stood in front of a mirror, questioning our worth because of someone else's opinion? How often have we silenced our own voices, waiting for the world to finally approve of who we are? But what if the real transformation isn't about becoming someone new, but about returning to who we were before the world told us we weren't enough? Lila didn't just reclaim her reflection. She reclaimed her voice, her purpose, and her power. And maybe her story isn't so different from your own. Whether you're 18 or 80, healing has no age limit. Your story still matters. Your voice still carries weight. And your wings, they may just be waiting for you to notice them. What did this story awaken in you? Do you believe healing starts from within? Have you ever had someone truly see you? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your experience in the comments below. Let's build a space where stories like Lila's can help others feel less alone. If this story stirred your heart, please like the video, subscribe to Warm Soul Stories, and join us weekly for more true-to-life tales of healing, love, and human resilience. Because every soul deserves to be seen, and maybe, just maybe, you're someone else's light in the dark. Don't hide it.